Hi, I'm David Harmon, and this is my partner Keith Cook. We are real estate brokers with RE/MAX in Bellingham, Washington.
On our website, a lot of people were searching real estate terms, so this video specifically, this series will be for real estate glossary or lingo or terms that realtors or brokers are using in real estate. So hopefully you like it. We are brokers. The end result is what we're hoping for is that people like what we have to say. They want to list their property for sale or help them find a property to buy. So check it out, like, subscribe, and hope you enjoy.
Earnest money, a deposit that a prospective buyer gives the seller as evidence of good faith intent to complete the transaction.
So the earnest money is a good faith deposit that the buyer will put on the property, and it's usually refundable. Or it can be non-refundable. So we've had some where, depending on the competition, that buyer writes the offer, boom, seller gets money the next day. And usually that's going to happen when there's competition or other buyers are competing for that same property. Traditionally, in a normal market, what happens is a buyer puts down an earnest money deposit, and typically they're going to have most likely two contingencies, and that's assuming we have clear title and everything's passed that way. But the main two contingencies are inspection and financing. And so if the property doesn't pass the inspection, the buyer's going to get the earnest money back, and if it doesn't pass the appraisal, the buyer will get the earnest money back. So it's a good faith deposit, and they are important. You have to fill in the blank, and it's a little complicated, but typically I would say between like 1% and 5% your earnest money amount, and anything above that is treated differently. Hey Dave, in real estate, what is an easement?
An easement is the access generally through somebody else's property for your benefit. So it could be a utility easement for utilities. It could be a driveway for you to ingress, egress from your property over somebody else's property. But an easement can be multiple things, but it's basically granting you access through somebody else's property.
Agreed.
Eminent domain, the government's constitutional power to take or condemn private property for public use as long as the owner is paid just compensation.
And realistically, as a group, if we're Americans and we're here together, it does make sense. So one person can't get in the way of the benefit for all. So it takes the idea that, just like with freeways, if there wasn't eminent domain, we wouldn't have a freeway because there'd be holdouts for their people's own individual interests. So usually it's going to happen if there's some type of, mostly I would say eminent domain comes in with roads and freeways or power lines or infrastructure utilities. It's going to happen to where the government's going to believe, the local municipalities or federal, that there's a benefit for this property to become state property. And it's a process when you go through it because they have to pay you fair market value. There has to be timing on it, or replacement property, looking at condition of replacement property, looking at how much of the property they're taking. Are they taking your whole piece or just a sliver of it? So it's kind of a complex process. We've been involved in several of them, and they're all a little bit different. So this doesn't happen that often, but when it does, it's definitely affects people who this happens to. Sometimes they may widen a road, and they may take your whole front yard. And how does that affect other values? So we've helped a lot of people work on how this affects their value and what their process is in moving forward. But it is something that's out there, and your property can be taken for the better good of everybody. So sucks, but it can happen.
Encroachment, a physical intrusion onto the neighboring property, usually due to a mistake regarding the location of the boundary.
Yeah, that's not fun.
No.
And there's different types of encroachments that are out there. You can either encroach on your neighbor, you can encroach on government property. For the most part, it would probably be identified with a survey. And mostly you could encroach, or do you have permission to encroach? So it's really going to be a legal issue that's going to come in. Some of the older surveying things have come in to where property lines are off, and we've seen them where people assumed that one property corner was right and the next 10 people went off 1 point. Well, if that first point was off, the next 10 properties are off. And there's some issues that if you have your property for so long, you can actually become your property. So if there is an encroachment, you would want to seek legal advice. The best way to be certain that there are not any encroachments on a property would probably be to have a licensed bonded surveyor survey your property, and then make sure that you identify your property corners, and then you watch and maintain and keep an eye on your property corners just to make sure that you're not stuck with someone actually coming in and encroaching on you. And
right.
Sometimes this can happen with vacant land or rental properties or properties that you don't go by and look at on a regular basis. If you're not looking at it and you haven't seen it in a long time, who knows? There might be an encroachment going on.
Right.
So maintaining your property lines is just a good steward of the land, making sure that you're protecting your real estate investment.
I'd say, yeah, it can be as simple as a fence. So maybe the fence needs to be moved a couple of feet, or it could be the foundation of the house that's encroaching or whatever. And maybe you have a property where you know you're encroaching and your neighbors are fine with it. But what you need to think about is, what if those neighbors are gone down the road? You don't have anything in writing, it's all verbal, and you know that you're encroaching and your neighbor knows they're fine with it, but then they sell their property and now you have a new neighbor. How's that going to affect your property if you're encroaching? So,
yeah, it's best to have things finalized and put in writing and truly make sure everyone knows what they're getting into. And as long as it's identified, then there won't be any hard feelings.
Encumbrance, a non-possessory interest in real property, a right or interest held by someone other than the property owner, which may be a lien, an easement, a profit, or a restrictive covenant.
So essentially, you may own a piece of property, but then other people kind of have a little bit of a say-so on what could happen with it. So the lien would be, say I own the property and I owe Dave some money. So Dave has a lien or a mortgage on the property. If it's an easement, it may be I own the property and Dave owns the neighboring property and he wants to go to the lake. So he's granted himself an easement to go over my property to get to the property. He doesn't own my property, but he has the right to go over part of it. A restrictive covenant may be that Dave's got his property and I have mine, and it's with a view, and Dave may have a restrictive covenant that I cannot cut my trees or I have to maintain them below 30 feet. And so that would give Dave his view. If not, if I was at 60 and Dave couldn't see the lake, Dave may not like that. So there might be a covenant that way. So lots of properties do have encumbrances. It's hard to find something that, you know, you might have a railroad right away, you might have a power easement, a utility easement. There's a lot of kind of encumbrances that are on pieces of property. Officially what we get, with each property we sell, we get a title report that actually comes up and brings up everything that's recorded against the property. So you'll know, is there mineral rights? Is there air rights? Is there any type of restrictive covenants on the property? So we order a title profile and a title report on each property we work on almost immediately, because we want to know what all the limitations are on each property. So it's pretty important, but it's definitely out there. It's rare to find a piece of property that doesn't have some type of encumbrance. Hey Dave, in real estate, what is equity?
Equity is the actual value that you would have in a property. So if you paid cash for a house, you'd have 100% equity in your house. You wouldn't owe anybody any money. Say you bought a house for $100,000 and now the house is worth $200,000, you would have $100,000 in equity. So it's the excess that you actually have in value over what you would owe, whether it be a mortgage or a lien. Erosion. Gradual loss of soil due to the action of water or wind.
So where we're located in Whatcom County, Washington, we don't run into the wind erosion, which we will. I've seen it like the sand dunes and stuff, and even eastern Washington where you're going to get more wind-driven sand. We don't run into that here, but we do absolutely run into water erosion. And we'll find that either on rivers or creeks, and we get a lot of water, move stuff around, and things will erode. And we'll also get it on our saltwater front with tides and waves and just how things go that way. So it does happen around here, and usually you're going to want to maintain or look at your property and understand if you're buying waterfront. And now sometimes we may have flooding that you could actually not own property on the water, but all of a sudden water's coming in there because you're in a flood area. And so sometimes you'll get erosion with that too. Say a buyer wants to make sure they're not overpaying for a property. So they'll agree to outbid a competing buyer by a certain dollar amount. So let's just say we write an offer for $100,000 and the buyer says, I'll beat the next offer by $5,000. So let's just say the second offer comes in at $120,000. Theoretically, that would make the first buyer $125,000 because they're going to beat the competing offer by that $5,000 increment. Most buyers will put a ceiling as far as the maximum that they would go. They're not going to say we'll pay $1 million for it. Maybe in this case they said they'll pay up to $140,000 for it. And this fits in that less than $140,000, more than $100,000, beat another offer by $5,000. So it's kind of a way to soft step your way into not overpaying for the property, but letting the owner know you have an interest in paying more. Just like all things in life, people are going to have different opinions or variations. Some brokers and sellers think highest and best offer, put that up there, and that's the only number I want to see. Some people like the accelerator addendums because you get more people competing. So there's different strategies, but it is something that is out there in real estate. Escrow is an independent third party who works in a real estate transaction. They don't represent the buyer or the seller. They prepare all the closing documents. They will help perfect title. And at the end, they're who you sign your closing documents with. And they will simultaneously take the buyer's money and the signed deed from the seller. And once it's recorded, simultaneously transfer to each other once perfecting the sale. At the end, they're your favorite people.
Estoppel, a legal doctrine that prevents a person from asserting rights or facts that are inconsistent with his earlier actions or statements.
Usually what we'll see with that is combined with the estoppel certificate in commercial real estate or multifamily. And it's basically if you're buying a piece of property and there's already some agreements in place. So say you have you're buying a commercial property and there's a lease, and so if you're buying it over and you want to make sure you're taking that lease over, you'll do an estoppel and just make sure that everyone's on the same page. So it's just like an up-to-date acknowledgement. Here's the terms of our agreement, and it makes sense for all parties moving forward to understand the exact terms moving forward so that the tenant knows what's going on, the seller and the buyer understand how to move forward with that transaction, and helping with closing and just with deposits and when the rate goes up or down or who pays utilities. So it's a nice written clarification of where we're at with that agreement.
Dispossession or expulsion of someone from real estate.
Yikes.
There you go.
That's not a good one.
No.
But for a lot of people will have a home that's a rental. So if you're a tenant and you are renting the property, you pay rent. And for some reason, if you're in a breach of the contract for either not paying rent or abusing the property or not abiding by the terms of the rental agreement, you can be evicted. Similarly, you can be quasi-evicted from a house even if you own or occupy it. With the foreclosure, that's different. But if you forget to make the payments, the bank has a chance to depossess. They can depossess you as well. So follow the rules and make your payments.
A person named in a will to carry out its provisions.
And believe it or not, people do pass away. And so I think planning for when you pass away comes in handy. So typically what's going to happen, someone will have a will, and that will appoint someone to be the executor, and we'll work with a lot of executors. Sometimes they have the property to sell. So if you pass away, you have a will, the will appoints an executor of the estate, and a lot of times they're looking at the assets, and many times real estate will be sold during that process. If you don't have a will, it's a pain in the neck, and I highly suggest talking to an attorney, getting a will, and getting your house in order. A cost-benefit analysis of a proposed project, often required by lenders before they make a loan commitment.
Yeah, it's kind of a broad term, different applications. Sometimes in a commercial loan, your lender may require a feasibility study just to make sure that what you're going to be doing with the property, income possibilities, whatever, meet their criteria. So that's something that's mandatory there. Generally, we would see it in like vacant land sales with the feasibility study. Just it gives the buyer a chance to check out a property, make sure it's going to fit their needs if they're building the house, what the water supply is, what the sewer septic situation is. So it gives a time frame for a buyer to check out a piece of property without being fully committed. So short-term feasibility study is something definitely that you want to check out if you're buying any type of vacant land.
Yeah, it's a pretty broad term. I would probably say it's one of the most crucial or important steps for a buyer, because it's making sure you can do it. So if we're selling a home on acreage, let's just say we know you can put a house there because you've got a house, you've got a driveway, you've got septic or sewer, water, and you know it can be put there, and the buyer doesn't have to worry about all the costs of bringing all of those improvements into the property. Currently in our county, it's challenging and difficult because we're brought with these new regulations, and they're changing. So we have wetlands, which is a big regulation, so they'll have to hire basically an engineer to come out, see if the property's wet, and then if it is wet, you have to go to the edge of that, and then setbacks. And then so you look at the setbacks from the wetlands, and then there's setbacks from a well and setbacks from a septic, all of the costs of dealing with that, and then your general typical closing costs or construction costs for building. So it's pretty complicated, but basically Washington's different than from other states because Washington gives the buyer a chance to research the property during a period that they're in contract, versus some areas won't allow you to be in contract while you're doing that. So I like the rule in Washington where put an offer in, it's similar to an inspection. You're going to have the property inspected or have a feasibility study. If the buyer's not satisfied with that inspection, they can cancel the agreement and move forward. So they're good to do, and we can help you. Fee simple, the highest and most complete form of ownership, which is potentially infinite duration, also called fee or fee simple absolute.
Yeah, fee simple is definitely what you want to have in a property. It just means that you have the ultimate right to the property. There's technically no real restrictions to what you can do with it, and it goes infinite to maybe your heirs, or you can pass it down. So it's definitely the most highest, best type of ownership to have in real estate.
There's other uses too, and not getting off of this one, but like if you have a leasehold interest, which does come into play sometimes. So if you're say you have a manufactured home and it's in a park, and you basically have a rental agreement, even though you have the home, but it's a rental agreement. Or some areas, usually if it's dealing with the government, have some type of leasehold lease. So if it's tribal property, some tribes have fee simple, some tribes have leasehold interest. And there's some government properties where the government owns property in Whatcom County and actually leases it out to people too. Out at Birch Point, there's some properties out there that are waterfront, beautiful homes, but actually the government actually still owns the property in their leasehold. So fee simple or fee simple is the highest form that you can own. So that's what we're aiming for.
Yeah, just do your research and make sure that you know what you're getting into when you're purchasing a property, because you need to read between the lines and make sure that you are getting something that's fee simple if that's what you want in a property. Fiduciary relationship. A relationship of trust and confidence where one party owes the other loyalty and higher standard of good faith than is owed to the third party. For example, an agent is a fiduciary in relation to the principal. Spouses are fiduciaries in relation to another.
As brokers, we're in different positions. So sometimes you're representing a buyer, sometimes you're representing a seller. There's an opportunity to be a dual agent where you represent both or represent neither. So there's different, different relationships. But just for vocabulary purposes, this was the definition of fiduciary, and we do have a higher responsibility when we're dealing with people that fall within that category.
FIRPTA. The Foreign Investment in Real Property Tax Act. This federal law requires withholding funds from a sale of real property when the seller is not a U.S. citizen or a resident alien in order to prevent tax evasion.
Yeah, this one's a pain in the neck. Each agreement that we have actually has to have this form, this FIRPTA agreement, and even if it's a U.S. citizen selling to a U.S. citizen, it has to be disclosed that it's a U.S. citizen. It's if you're a non-U.S. citizen, let's say if you're Canadian, you're going to buy down here, you'd probably want to do some work ahead of time and to understand what the rules are when you sell a property. So if a Canadian is selling a property, the closing agent, Escrow, is going to withhold a percentage of the sales price and send that off to the IRS as a good faith estimate as what they think your taxes are. And so Canadians are taxed on their gain in the United States and they're taxed on their gain in Canada. A clever way to do it, talk to us obviously before you're buying. Our suggestion would be you might want to consider putting your Washington State or United States holdings in a United States company. And now when that company was to sell the property, it's not falling under the same jurisdiction. So Canadian buys a property, starts a new LLC, ABC LLC, and now ABC LLC owns it. When they go to sell it, that is a U.S. entity selling the property, not a Canadian. So anyways, it comes up on a lot of them. If the good faith tax that is, or estimate that is sent off to the IRS is not necessarily what the tax is. It may be, let's just say, the IRS receives $10,000 in the sale of a property, but the Canadian actually owed $8,000. They'll get a refund of the $2,000. Or let's just say they actually owed $13,000. Well, they'll have to pay another $3,000. So, and that's established the year after it's sold in that tax year. So the property owner is going to be required to file a tax return for that year, and that's when it's all established. There's a lot of, let's get into taxes to figure everyone out, but it's just something to be aware of if you're Canadian, that you might not get all of your proceeds at closing.
Yeah, and there is a process to get that money back, like Keith was saying, but it's through some paperwork, and generally you would want to consult either a CPA or an accountant or somebody to help file those documents properly so that you can get your money back.
Right.
First mortgage, the mortgage on a property that has first lien position, the one with a higher lien priority than any other mortgage against the property. A junior mortgage is a mortgage that has a lower lien priority than the mortgage against the same property, sometimes called the second mortgage. Which one's better, first or second place?
First. Usually the first have a lot less risk, so if it was to be a foreclosure situation, the first gets paid first, the second gets paid second. So usually if you're going to do a second, most seconds that we'll see is like a home equity line of credit. So you've got equity in your home, you don't want to cash out your first mortgage, you want to take out a home equity line of credit that's there available for you to borrow money whenever you want it. That is put into a junior or a second position against the property. So if anything was to happen to the property, The first gets paid first, the second gets paid second. So rates are quite a bit higher than a first mortgage. First lien position. The position held by a mortgage or deed of trust that has a higher lien priority than any other mortgage or deed of trust against the property.
First lien is generally would be like your main mortgage that you have on the house. So when you purchase your house, if you have a mortgage, they're going to have a lien against your property. That would be the first lien. If you were to borrow against your house for whatever reason and maybe have a second mortgage, that would take second place. So you have the first and the second mortgage. If you sell the house or if something happens, that first position gets the first rights to whatever equity perhaps you may have in the house, and then whatever left over would go to the next person. So that can be multiple different people. That could be different lenders that have some type of a lien against your house. But so yeah, if you loan money on a house or anything else, you always want to be in first position in case something happens that you're the first one to get your money back.
Sure. And we'll see a lot with home equity lines of credit. So you owe a few bucks on your house and you don't necessarily want to refinance it, but you want to tap into some of your equity. You'd go to your lender, get a home equity line of credit or HELOC, and now that's going to be in a second position. So they're at higher risk than the first position, and they're going to charge a little bit more interest, and they're going to have their criteria as how much they would lend up to the value. But that's why those rates are a little bit higher, because they don't have the exact security that the first mortgage has. There's a few different types of mortgages. You're going to either have a fixed rate mortgage or an adjustable rate mortgage. An adjustable rate mortgage will go up and down depending on what it's tied to. There's different indexes on where the rate can go up and down. Depending on how long you're going to have the mortgage would depend on how risky you feel on playing the market to see where you think rates are going to stay high or low. Traditionally, people go for a fixed rate mortgage because that'll be locked in for either 30 years or 15 years, depending on how long you're planning on financing residentially. If it's commercially, it may be 20 or 25 years. So either way, it just depends on what works best for you and your family.
An item that used to be personal property but has been attached to or closely associated with real property in such a way that it has legally become part of the real property. That's a lot of, that's broad.
Well, the agreements spell out like what's included and what's not included. So like blinds, some people may have their personal blinds, and that's probably one that's come up the most with window coverings. We're seeing more with attached televisions as we're getting there. Sheds sometimes that are removable. So sometimes people think something's included and it's not. So if someone can pick it up and take it away, I would double check on that just to be sure. But for the most part, most of the items are included.
FSBO, or for sale by owner, a property that is being sold by the owner without the help of a real estate agent.
Don't do it. I'm telling you, honestly, don't do it. I mean, it's wild. We're in a deal right now where owner tried selling it, and look at some of our ethics and some of our other contracts. You just don't know what you're getting into. There's some people who are out there that are trying to take advantage of folks. And as a job as a broker, we come in and try to make everything equal and fair. So for sale by owner can happen, for sure. You can sell by owner. You can absolutely sell by owner. But are you getting the best value? And it's not always just money. Some of it's the terms as far as the whole contract. Some folks, I think they're going to save some money on commissions. If you were to Google and look at national averages, I think you'll see that brokers will sell homes for a greater amount than by owner. So you mostly get the work for free if the average, and we can't really talk too much about it, but say an average commission rate, which are negotiable, we'll say somewhere between 5 and 6%, but brokers generate between 9 and 10% more in a sales price. The seller is going to have an easier process and actually net more money. And it works better for the buyer too, because buyers are leery of for sale by owners, because there's a lot of internet trolling and scamming, and even with rentals. And so there's some bad operators out there. I think it just increases your chances of having a successful outcome if you're working with a broker. So try it or not. I don't like it.
Yeah, there's lots of different ways. If you're a buyer and you're looking for property that's for sale by owner, and you find something, it's easy to have a professional realtor come alongside you and help you through the process. So sometimes the seller may be willing to pay the real estate commission, or as a buyer, you have the option to pay us as brokers to help you through, and that way you're represented, and that kind of takes some of the scariness away from going through the process without having any type of representation. So it's a good way either way, just to have somebody on your team in a FISBO situation, whether you're a seller or a buyer, just to have somebody to reach out to.
Yeah, and great point. And you're making me think as you're saying that it's not uncommon that someone may have a friend that really, they're not selling it, but like, here's a property and I want to buy it. It may not be on the market, and whether you classify that as a buy owner or not, but if you identify a property in any resource or any capacity and you want to purchase it, having a broker help go through the process, that's going to help. And I think what I was saying earlier, where there may be problems, I think that's when you're doing a transaction without any professionals involved, either brokers or attorneys. If they're not involved in the transaction, I think there's a higher chance of it not working out perfectly.
Foreclosure, when a lien holder causes a property to be sold against the owner's wishes so that the unpaid lien can be satisfied from the sales proceeds.
Yeah, don't go there. You don't want to be in a foreclosure.
Yeah, if you were alive in 2008 or 9, that was like the word of the day.
See short sale.
Yeah.
But foreclosures, they've always been out there regardless of the market. There's been people who weren't able to meet their obligations with their monthly payments, and people who were owed the money, their recourse was to take the property back. Generally, if there's a foreclosure, if you have equity in it, it would make sense to get in touch with a broker and see about trying to sell it to beat the foreclosure and get as much of your equity out of it as possible ahead of time. Otherwise, you're in jeopardy of losing all of your equity. So they're a pain in the neck. If you're in any type of foreclosure, we can, reach out to us. We're a good resource too, because we're not always looking to sell all the homes. We do like to help people figure their situations out. So sometimes it's just a matter of restructuring your financing and seeing what we can do to help out. So we're not lenders, we're not attorneys, but we're run into real estate situations all the time that we can help people out with. And if you're seeing foreclosure and if that's important to you, there's a lot of ways to do workarounds.
Functional obsolescence, loss in value due to inadequate or outdated equipment, or as a result of poor or outdated design. I like 70s houses. I don't think there's I think it's actually kind of trendy, like functional obsolescence at some point in time could actually become tremendous value down the road.
It could. The 70s are coming back, and I think there's
mid-century. I mean, everybody you either want a farmhouse or a mid-century modern.
Right. I haven't run into it that much, but something maybe home in a neighborhood where it's a one bathroom, and it's something that you can't really fix. Or the floor plan is like the kitchen's tucked in the corner, and it's really not as open, or just how you enter the house, stairs, small garages. The appraisers generally don't note a lot of functional obsolescence, but if you're walking around, there's things that you just don't like about the property, that would be a functional obsolescence. So obsolete, or something that we're doing different now. It's out of date, not current. Just say like with garages initially from 100 years ago, they were built for these little, small cars. And right now you can't get a standard big size, say, SUV in a carriage house. So that would be functional obsolescence.
Goodwill, an intangible asset of a business resulting from a good reputation with the public, serving as an indication of future return business.
And this isn't really used in residential, but it'll be used in commercial. So if you have Dave's Pizza Joint and you're selling it and you're retiring it and someone's gonna keep the name Dave's Pizza Joint and the location, when you're figuring out the math as far as what I'm gonna pay for your pizza joint for the real estate and the location, there's fixtures. Goodwill is one of the factors to know what it is to buy your good reputation pizza. And the pepperoni is awesome.
Yeah, it's somewhat of a shortcut, I guess, right? Like if you're going to start from scratch, you're going to have to build up to that reputation. Whereas if somebody has a lucrative business or a great business going and they already have name recognition, then you can kind of step in and avoid some of the ups and downs of trying to start something from scratch. So that goodwill can definitely get you into the profit zone a lot quicker than starting from zero. Gross income multiplier, a figure which is multiplied by rental property's gross income to arrive at an estimate of the property's value, also called a gross rent multiplier.
What I like about the gross rent multiplier, it makes it easier to see with comparables. So we can take the rent, times it by a number, and you're going to get the price of a property, which a lot of people will also use capitalization rate, and there's just more math that goes into a capitalization rate. And from a broker, it's hard to understand all the information that people put out there. So let's just say your kid mows the lawn on your fourplex you're selling and you don't pay him, or you pay him a different amount. It's hard to put that number in there. Or if you have a property manager, do you manage it yourself? Is that number in there? Or there's a variety of things if you do things yourself on how maybe it makes your car payment for you. So capitalization rates are on larger properties, I would say, are a good basis, but the smaller properties I think are a little bit more difficult. The gross rent multiplier I think works pretty easy across the board because we can see what the rents are, do the math, and then compare them to other properties to see what the average gross rent multiplier is. So it's a pretty good tool, I think, for evaluating property values.
Growth Management Act, a Washington state law aimed at limiting sprawl and concentrating growth in an existing urban area.
Yeah, since Washington is still a young state, right? They're still trying to figure it out, and it's kind of cool to see where they think that people are going to live. So in Bellingham, to say right here, we'll have the urban growth area, and that's where they're expected, where Bellingham's going to expand to next. And small cities will have urban growth areas, but the state actually puts requirements on each county to say, all right, we're projecting the state to have this many people to your county. Where are they going to go? And so it's just a process of trying to figure out how to allocate land for future development. So kind of makes sense instead of people just sprawling all over. It makes sense because, hopefully 500 or 1,000 years from now, we've taken care of the world between now and then, and still have future land for development in the future.
Guaranteed loan, a loan in which the third party has agreed to reimburse the lender for losses that result if the borrower defaults.
And that would be something as simple as a co-signer. So if you're right on the edge of being able to get the loan, then a co-signer will definitely help push you over the edge and make that possible.
Right. You'll see a lot of that probably just with parents helping kids out on properties, just like your first car when you bought when you were 16. Working at Subway or whatever, your parents probably co-signed to help you get into that initial vehicle. And that happens in real estate as well.
Right.
Hard money mortgage, a mortgage given to a lender in exchange for cash as opposed to one given in exchange for credit.
Say someone wants to buy a property it may not finance, and someone doesn't have the cash to fix it up. And we're in a competitive market and there's not time enough to go get a rehab loan, or a variety of reasons. Someone may have poor credit and they just need to borrow some money in a hurry. It's a little bit easier loan to get in some aspects because the lenders that we've worked with are more likely lending on equity versus, that's the main thing they're looking at is equity in a property. So they may lend up to say 50, 60% of the loan to value of the property and then charge you a higher interest rate. But it's not necessarily a traditional lender who's going to require all of the appraisals and all of some of the other red tape. They'll still want title and escrow, but it's kind of more borrowing from a private party versus an institution. And so the private party has a lot easier loan guidelines, because if they like the project, they can lend on it. It's definitely become kind of an industry. There's some people who say you have $100,000 and you don't know how to invest it, and you put it in the bank. You're like, okay, I'm making 1 or 2% interest. There's some companies out there that specialize in hard money lending, and they will group together a group of, say, 6 people with $100,000 and then lend that $100,000 or $600,000 out to someone looking for a hard money loan. You're going to probably make 6-8% on your $100,000, so you're going to get a better rate of return. It's a little riskier than being in the bank, but there's ways you can, as an investor, come in and buy partial mortgages, and usually those are through the hard money lending process.
I think that some people are definitely a little leery of hard money lenders. Some people look at them as sharks or whatever, but the fact of the matter is there's some really quality ones out there that are definitely in the business of doing this and have an above board level of ethics, I would say. So there's definitely a concern for some investors when it comes to using hard money, but for the most part, if you do your due diligence, you'll find it could be a great asset when it comes to investing.
And we've seen it work successfully both from borrowing and lending. So these are private party people. You can talk to us about this, because we've helped people borrow money and we've helped people place money. And a lot of times it's helped us in some tricky situations in transactions to where we need some creative financing, and hard money is one of the more creative ways to try to structure a transaction. Highest and best use. The use which, at the time of an appraisal, is most likely to procure the greatest net return from the property over a given period of time.
Yeah, this is actually something that we're right in the middle of right now, because we're in the process of helping somebody out on a house that it's in a zoning that has a single family home on it, but the city in which this house lies, they'd much rather see something else there besides a single family house. So the individual buying it is his highest and best use of this is not to keep the house there. It's to generate something more, either a duplex or some more living space or something else which the property allows to have.
Yeah, it's kind of maximizing a property. And so a lot of times appraisers will depend on if it's a residential appraisal versus a commercial appraisal. So a residential appraisal would be, based on the actual use, what it is right now. So with Dave's situation there, that would appraise as a house. If you're going to look at it feasibility wise, or what's there, what could you do to maximize this property? So to maximize it, you have a piece of land that would accommodate, say, a 5-unit, a 4-unit, a duplex, but there's a house on it. What's the highest and best use? So it's almost like taking the property and considering nothing's there, and what would the highest and best use be? It may also consider the house is there too, but you have to look at the economic cost to remove the home and then to build, but it's just what's the best you can do with a piece of property. Home equity, a loan secured by the borrower's equity in their home they already own. It's also, I guess, known as like a HELOC or home equity line of credit. And for the most part, if you've got some equity in your home, it makes sense. And I would advise everyone to have a home equity line of credit, because you just never know in the case of an emergency. But even if you say you have a house and you have a mortgage on it, you would just go through the process of getting a loan. It's all ready to go. Costs a little bit to get it set up, but once you have it, that lasts for quite a while. And if you don't borrow any money against it, you don't pay anything. But if an emergency happens and you need $25,000 right away, you don't have to scramble. You can just go transfer money from your home equity line of credit to your bank account and you're set. I mean, that's a one-day transaction versus it may take a few months to set this up. So It makes sense to me to have it set up earlier because it is a kind of an emergency fund. Some people may use it to fix their home up and stuff, but it is borrowing money, and I think people can get in kind of the spiral of borrowing more money or not. But I would use it wisely, but I do think it makes sense to have that ability to get a big chunk of cash when needed. Homeowners Association. A non-profit association made up of homeowners in a subdivision responsible for enforcing the CC&Rs and managing other community affairs. CC&Rs is covenants, conditions, and restrictions that are the overlaying bylaws of what the rules are for a certain community.
Yeah, homeowners association can be a good thing. Some people like being in areas that have homeowner association. There's generally some type of dues involved, so it's something definitely you want to check out if you're looking at a property that has an HOA, because those can vary considerably. But it's kind of nice. It gives maybe a little bit of uniformity to a neighborhood, as opposed to just kind of doing your own thing. If there isn't an HOA, there's really no, once again, the CC&Rs that outline what you can do. So if somebody wants to paint their house bright yellow, if there's not an HOA or CC&Rs, then you can go ahead and do that. So it kind of, or have chickens in your yards.
It's kind of meant to, I think, protect the value of the neighborhood, and sometimes there's common interest or things like that. So Sudden Valley here locally has a homeowner association, and it's a big homeowner association, but there's a lot of amenities like no other in town. So you have marina and swimming pools and parks and all this stuff. So you're jointly throwing in money to help maintain that. And not so much at Sudden Valley, but any homeowner association, the benefit I think is that the entire neighborhood's going to be held up to a higher standard. Where it doesn't work for some people is they prefer to do their own thing, and if you want to paint your house yellow or have chickens, or you've got 10 project cars that you want to have in your front yard, maybe an HOA isn't for you.
Homeowners insurance. Insurance against damage to the real property and the homeowner's personal property.
And if you have a house, let's just say it's owner occupied, homeowners insurance will cover the contents of the house and repair the home if something happens. A lot of times it'll cover your car, personal belongings too, if it's not at the house. There's a lot of insurances looking at right here. I think it's important if you rent it out. I don't know if renter's insurance is one, but it's making sure to insure your contents. I know here at the office we have a business policy just for our contents, so it's not just if the building burns down, but it's the computers, the desks, all of that stuff. So that's a separate insurance. If you talk to an insurance person, I'm sure they have some insurance to sell you. There's earthquake insurance. There's all kinds of different, you can pay for whatever you want.
Quick question, is it mandatory to have homeowners insurance?
Trick question, because it's not. And so it's not mandatory to have homeowners insurance. That's making the assumption that you own the property free and clear. If you have a mortgage on the property, there will be a stipulation in that loan that you maintain insurance and actually have the underlying lien holder additionally insured. So if the house burnt down and say you got a check for $500,000, you just don't get to go cash the check. It's actually payable to you and the insurance company.
HUD, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development.
And a lot of times they're working connection with FHA. There's also something called HUD Homes, which were out there. We used to have a special key for that. But basically it's FHA type homes, Federal Housing Authority homes that someone purchased and then went through the foreclosure process. Then it goes back to HUD, Housing and Urban Development, who oversees selling of these assets. So it's just a process. It's something that's out there to talk about. HUD right now in our market, values have gone up so much. I haven't seen a HUD home pop up for a while in our market, but they have been in the past. We've sold HUD homes. If they pop up, generally they're distressed foreclosed properties that are usually purchased at a pretty good value. So if you see one of those, let us know. We'll check it out for you.
Income approach to value. one of the three main methods of appraisal, in which an estimate of the subject property's value is based on the net income it produces, also called the capitalization method or investor's method of appraisal.
And that's one thing I do love about appraisals, because these commercial appraisals, they'll put a lot of money in. They're not cheap, but you end up with a lot of information on your property, and they kind of just look at it through a few different ways. So like typically residential, it's going to be by sales comparison. So you have sales comparison, cost approach, which is what it costs to rebuild it, and income approach. So if you're buying a property for income property, I would be paying most attention to the income approach. It's a little funny in some aspects though, because if you're buying a property and it's under rented, that can cause a problem. So say the owner has had a tenant in there for 20 years, they're only charging $1,000, rent should be $1,600. So it can cause a bit of a quagmire, and that's where the buyer's gonna have to look to see what the value could be after you jack the rents up. Or not. I've had one, which probably my favorite. So I've had some properties where we've done this where, and I'd rather see people own property than not own property, but I've had a property and sell it, and with the buyer, with a tenant in there, and then you sell it years and years later, and that same tenant's still in there. And we've had nice people, and they haven't, moved the rent up as much as possible. But it does seem to me the folks who are in the folks who rent the property the longest end up probably getting a little better deal on rent, but the disadvantage is that you don't own the property. We just looked at a property a month ago, and the tenant was there for 20 years. And the disadvantage for that is they're going to be paying rent the rest of their lives, versus had 20 years ago, they put in a little bit of effort and work in order to buy a house. They would own it by now, and they wouldn't have any rent any longer. So in my mind, helping people with home ownership is one of the best things we can do, because when you want to retire, it'll help you get financially secure. Because if you're elderly and a big chunk of your rent is still going out for housing, that's not going to be a great retirement, versus if you don't have that housing expense, or it's a lot more reduced, then that's going to put you in a lot better position in the future. Income property, property that generates rent or other income for the owner, such as an apartment building. In federal income tax code, it's referred to as property held for the production of income.
Yeah, income property, like I said, it could be a single family house that you've purchased, or maybe you've lived in and you've stepped up to another house, you've kept that house, and it is creating an income for you. Hopefully, that's the purpose of it, is to generate some type of income. It could be a commercial space that you own, and then you rent those spaces out. So multiple things involved and can be looked at as income properties.
It's not a secret, it's not illegal to own income or to make income. And so if you have a house that's sitting empty, or a property, why not rent it out, make some income? The more properties you have, the more income you're going to generate, so it's going to put you in a better position. I know it sounds kind of funny just saying it that way, but it's a good, I think, retirement strategy for trying to get some homes or rental properties, because that'll put you in a way to get a little additional income down the road. If you don't have a pension, or you're not sure with the stocks, as far as I'm not a very good stock picker,
right,
but it's pretty easy to pick real estate, because if you're buying income producing real estate, I would make sure to say, because if you're buying a property that's generating income, you're going to have an income. You could take that same money and buy a property that's not generating income. Say you put it into raw land. Well, now you're not generating the income. You still own real estate, but you're not generating the income. So it's just the ownership of property that's going to generate income. Income ratio, a standard used in qualifying a buyer for a loan. Determine whether they have sufficient income, the buyer's debts and proposed housing expenses should not exceed a specified percentage of their income.
Yeah, this is kind of a big deal for lenders, especially if you're going to get a mortgage. They're going to look at those income ratios to make sure that you have enough income to pay for your property that you're looking to purchase. There's many other things that they look at as far as credit score, etc. But the income ratio will definitely define how much you can spend on a house, whether you want to use that maximum amount or not. But they're going to set the limitations of what that loan payment can be based on your ratio.
Mm-hmm. And different lenders have different ratios, different loans have different ratio types. For the most part, it kind of keeps you in line. So if you make $1,000 a week, and they're not going to want to find you a place where your housing is $1,200 a week. So they're going to make sure that it fits the guidelines. Our best bet is we don't lend money. We're the brokers. We'll help you find the property or sell the property. We have a great team of lenders that we work with. We can hook you up with them, and they can help you figure out with your income and the ratios what would be a comfortable mortgage payment for you, and then that calculates over to what a purchase price would be. And then that's where we help you find the property you're looking for. So I think it helps a lot. It's kind of a safety measure. They're not going to let you over borrow, so they're going to have lent millions and millions and helped all kinds of people. So they'll know what the ratios are successful for making sure that you're on the path to purchase a home and pay it off and own it. So it's a good process. Even with cars, if you're going to buy a car, there's going to be an income ratio. If they're going to buy a rental house, there's going to be an income ratio. So for the most part, it's just making sure that you qualify for the extra payment.
Ingress, a means of entering a property, the opposite of egress. The term ingress and egress are most commonly used in reference to an access easement.
Yeah, you have to get your property. And that's something where the title company will help make sure that you have actually legal access to your property. Not all properties have access. So if it's an easement, usually it's ingress, egress, and utilities. But it's making sure you can access your property. But I physically have seen properties that were basically landlocked because they had a property, you're a bunch of other surrounding property owners, and you didn't touch a public road, or you didn't dedicate a little path to get there. So pretty important to be able to get to your property unless you got a drone or a helicopter.
And a lot of people get them mixed up. So here's an easy reminder. Ingress means in, egress is out. So when you're going in, it's ingress, out is egress. So don't get them confused.
Right. Installment note. This one's fairly easy. It's a promissory note that calls for regular payments of principal and interest until the debt is fully paid. And I guess this is a little bit different from like a credit card. I think usually I pay my bill off, so I'd have to look at it, but I think they'll just let you pay the interest till the cows come home. Usually in real estate, unless you're doing an interest only, you're only making the interest payments. That happens in some cases, but for most of it, there is, with the installment note, it's based on an amortization, so you make so many payments and sooner or later you pay the mortgage off.
Interest-only loan. Most commonly, a loan that requires the borrower to pay only the interest during the loan term, with the principal due at the end of the term, also called a term loan.
And interest only versus a principal and interest payment. So with interest only, you're paying just interest only, so it'll never end. You will pay that interest till eternity. The only way that loan's going to go down is if you add to it and pay principal. So most of our loans we're seeing are principal and interest. The interest loans come in handy when you're an investor and you just want to increase your cash flow and lower your monthly payment. The risk of that is none of that payment is going towards the purchase. So you need to pay some principal in order to get that ultimately paid off. But it's a great tool for a variety of reasons. If the seller doesn't want to receive the full payment or cash out, it comes in pretty handy.
Interest. Number one is a right or share in something such as a piece of real estate. Two would be a charge a borrower pays to a lender for the use of the lender's money.
Double meaning.
Yep.
Who would have thought? So
very interesting.
So yeah, I think that's kind of self-explanatory, but you don't have to own a home all by yourself. So if you're a married couple, you own a property, you each kind of have 50-50. If you're business partners on a property and there's 4 of you that go in, maybe you're each 25%. So it's just a fractional ownership of a property. And I think the other one's self-explanatory. If you borrow some money from someone, not only do you get to pay that back, but you get to give them a little spiff or a little interest for the right to borrow the money.